Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode, another edition of Wednesday Night Live with yours truly, Simon Jacobson. I welcome you all, whether you're here physically or somewhere in cyberspace. And the topic this evening is your life fragmented? One of the great challenges, especially coming from a Torah, Jewish tradition, is making it relevant to our lives. The fact is that with over 50% assimilation, or even higher than that, there's a big dramatic change that took place, especially for the Jewish people. But in truth, it's really for all humans on earth, that if you turn the clock back 500 years ago, you'll find that most Jews lived in either shtetls in Eastern Europe or Central Europe, or in towns in the Sephardic world, whether it was the Arabic countries or Israel and other places. And each community was a very strong, dedicated community with very little assimilation. The reason for that, on a very ostensible level, was because there was no real other option. There were no options. The Jews were persecuted and identified as Jews, and as such, had to contend with that. They could not even mingle and go to the same universities or choose trades that the Gentile world would not allow them into. But with the changes that began taking place in the Middle Ages, the 17th century, Renaissance, followed by what's called the emancipation of the Jews, the Enlightenment, the different terms used, was essentially an entry into what would become the world in which we are today, the modern age of freedom, so to speak, where individual right began being respected, where the monarchs and the churches of old and their absolute authority began to topple. Science and reason began to become a major factor. It wasn't just whatever the leader or the despot decided, and this had a positive impact on the Jewish world with the persecution and much of the so-called institutionalized anti-Semitism became weaker and weaker until we live in a world today. So ironically, with these new freedoms and options also came the beginning and birth of essentially what some people call Jewish assimilation. I'll just call it irrelevance. People embrace things that they find relevant to them. The books you read, the people you meet, the places you travel to, you choose to do so because there's something there that you find is interesting to you. Whether it's a healthy thing or not is irrelevant here, but the bottom line is if you find relevance in something, that's what you pursue. And that's what we do every day on a daily basis. The things we think are relevant to us, informed or misinformed, but that's what we think, that's what takes up our time. And things we find irrelevant are pushed off to the wayside. So when you see people embracing something or not embracing something, immediately tells you one word and one word only: it's not relevant to them. Because if something's relevant, people go to the end of the world to find it. And if it's not, even if it's right in front of them, they're not going to pursue it. So the great challenge, and I speak also on a personal level, is as I was growing up, and I grew up in a traditional Jewish environment and home, and went to the yeshiva system and all that. So first thing for myself, even though I grew up with it, I was accustomed to it, and it was so-called part of my culture and social upbringing, but the question of relevance always bothered me, because I saw many people doing things by rote or mechanically without necessarily finding or choosing. Now, we all grow up in communities, and every home or family or society in which we grow up, we all are somewhat conformists, whether we like to admit it or not. Most of the things we do are not based on any type of real free choice. That's what it is. It's either the styles of the time, the standards, the things people are reading, the things people are doing, and so on. But for myself, the biggest challenge was that if religion, Judaism, has something true to offer, it should be something that has validity on its own merit, not just because a lot of people are doing it. or because you grew up with it, or you are, some would say, brainwashed or programmed to do something. And as I began to delve into the deeper called dimensions of understanding the Torah, as opposed to just being a story or history, but being really a deep mystical tradition that identifies, like a blueprint, the inner psyche of our human beings and of the cosmos and how they function and how they work, I realized how great the dichotomy was. That 500 years ago maybe it wasn't necessary to dig that deep, because the society, as I said, was simply conducive and not allowed. The insulation that the Jews were experiencing did not allow for any other option. But in a world where there are options, and where the customer is always right, in our capitalistic world, there's many options and choices. It's critical to have to find and dig deeper and find the deeper meaning and relevance of every detail of the Torah, and then one can perhaps embrace it with passion and commitment, not just because out of programming or just rejecting it outright because it doesn't seem relevant. So that's the operative word, relevance, finding relevance. It's actually a verse in the Torah which again may go unnoticed until the challenge comes our way. Like many things, you don't appreciate something until it really becomes important to address. So in the book of Deuteronomy, which is the last book of the Torah, where Moses gives his last will and testament, Ela Advarim, the book of Dvarim it's called, the words of Moses. So one of the last things Moses says to the people in a very famous statement was this, that his words are, you may think, or you may consider, you may be concerned that this thing, and this thing he means the spiritual search, the commitment, may be difficult to access. And he says these words, he says, know that it's not distant from you, it's not across the wide sea, and it's not in heaven. And then he says the conclusion, he says, Ki karav elecha davar ma'ed, however this thing is actually close to you, very close, in your mouth, in your heart, and in your actions. And the key word here, close, karev, what does karev mean? So obviously it wasn't meaning close, that don't think that the Torah or the spiritual search and the spiritual reaching higher spiritual heights and higher state of consciousness, and he says it's not in heaven, and it doesn't mean physically in heaven or physically, it means to say that it's not relevant, or maybe too inaccessible, maybe too cryptic, it may not be palatable or accessible, attainable. So karev is a very powerful word because it means not just close. You can be close to something and not find it relevant. You can be distant physically from something and find it very relevant. We can love someone even though they're on another side of the earth, and you can sit near someone and have no relationship with them at all. So karev is, the word means that it's relevant, that's accessible, relevant to our personal lives. And that is the key word, that if we approach it that way, then any idea and any story or episode or narrative or character in Torah and in Jewish history has to answer that one fundamental question. How is that relevant to my life? Why should I care? Who cares? And if you ask the question, you'll find that, as the statement goes, Shailas Chacham, the question of a wise person is half an answer. If you ask the right questions, you're already halfway there. And that's the question, what is the relevance? And understanding that becomes the key to really appreciating, and why we'd be sitting here all together. Why are we sitting here this evening? Or wherever people may be. With some people it's in the morning, some people it's in the afternoon, wherever they are in the world. Why spend an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours listening to me, or coming to this class, or in any other way engaging, whether it's this class or other classes that you may go to? It comes down to relevance. From my point of view, I wouldn't sit here if I didn't think I'm saying something that at least I think is relevant to me, and hopefully to you as well. Because everybody's time is valuable. If you're going to spend time, means that this is the best thing you can be doing at this moment. I remember once someone calling me, someone I know well, who was just beginning his speaking career. So being a person who was lectured and spoken many times, so different individuals come to me sometimes for coaching tips on public speaking. So this guy called me, he was in Chicago, and he was about to, in the next few minutes, next 10, 15 minutes, he was about to deliver a lecture. It was about a perspective of Torah, perspective on science. And when he saw the audience, he realized there were many scientists in the audience, and he called me like almost having a panic attack, saying that I'm a young guy, I'm about to get up to give a talk, And I see many people are far more qualified, and especially in the science and so on. And I feel like it's not my position to what right do I have to get up to say anything. So I told him this had to do in a few minutes because he was about to go up there. I said, look, any talk you give, the first thing you have to ask yourself is the most important thing that you and everyone else in the room could be doing at this moment? If you don't respect that, you shouldn't be speaking altogether. And the second question is not whether you have something brilliant to say. It could be you're in the right place at the right time. If you're a student of great teachers and you've read the right books, so even though there may be people in the audience more educated than you in other areas, or even in some areas that in your areas, but the fact is you're not sharing just your ideas. This isn't about you pontificating, expressing yourself, letting yourself be heard. It's about because you feel this is the most important thing people could be hearing right now. You have a message that's relevant to their lives. And later he told me that this not just changed the way he spoke that evening, but his whole approach to speaking. Because communicating and speaking is not what people think it is, an art to speak. Yes, obviously there are people who have oratory skills and have the right wordsmiths and know how to express polished and fashion and craft good poetic sentences and get the point across. But there's a far deeper element to communication, which we actually learned from Moses, who was the ultimate communicator. But oddly, and he would say bizarrely, Moses was also a man of no words. That actually says in the Torah. Moses says, "Alay ish dvarim," a man of no words. And yet, as a man of no words, his words are probably more popular than anyone's words in history. The Bible remains the biggest bestseller every year, year after year. All the books on the New York Times bestseller and all bestseller lists don't come close to the Bible. It continues to sell more than all books put together. And this is thousands of years later. So here's a man whose words have been poured over and analyzed and repeated and read again and again and continue to be read, and he says, I'm a man of no words. And when God wants to choose him to speak, to become the communicator, to become God's messenger to take the Jews out of Egypt, and then to give them the Torah, and so on, Moses gives God a big argument in the book of Exodus, right in the beginning of the chapter, the beginning of the story. First, we hear how Moses argues with God and says, I am a man of no words. He uses different expressions. Aral sfasayim, my lips are sealed. Another expression he uses is kvad pev, kvad loshen, my mouth is difficult for me to speak. And he had a speech impediment. Different commentaries explain how that came to be and what exactly that meant. So of all people God chose to communicate and speak, and remember in those days there was no technology. It was all coming from the mouth. There was nothing like, there were no fax machines and there were no emails and there were no texting. And there was no way of electronically turning words into communicative tools. It was all a man speaking to other men. When I say a man, a human being speaking to other humans. And of all people, God chooses him. And we have a whole episode, a whole story talks about it. And then God says the immortal words, the memorable words, that teach the story of real communication. God says to him, God doesn't say to him, and I still choose you. God says, Misam Pela Adam. Who gives a man a mouth to speak? Who gave a man a mouth to speak in the first place? It's I. You think that it's you and your oratory skills that are the power to communicate? It's I that gave a human being the power to speak. And if you are dedicated to conveying what I want you to convey, it will be communicated. In other words, it's all about really communicating something that's greater than you are. So if it was about the best speaker on earth, Moses probably would not have been the first choice. But if it was the truest speaker on earth, Moses was the choice because he was the humblest man that ever walked on earth. And he became the communicator, and he got the message across. He got the Jews out of Egypt. He got the Torah to us, and we're still repeating his words thousands of years later. So, who was right? And we have many, many great orators. We don't even know their names and their speeches, and though they may have had beautiful linguistic skills and so on. So, a man of no words is the key to understanding. It's not about you and your words and your ideas. It's about a resonating message that's relevant to the people you're speaking to. And if you're a channel, like any good artist and any good skilled person will say, you're in the zone, you become a channel for a higher wisdom that flows through you, then you're worthy to be listened to. Which really means, in different words, as odd as it may sound, that really good communicating is really good speaking is really good listening. You're listening to the vibes of the people you're speaking to, and you're really giving them back something that is inside of them that they may not be able to articulate, but will resonate because they sense it to be true. And that's the true art of communication. It's about engendering and establishing trust. Trust is the key. If there's no trust, no one's interested in what anyone has to say. Especially when you're talking about things that matter. It's one thing if you're going for a real estate seminar, and you're going for tips on how to invest. You don't really care how arrogant the teacher may be. If he's intelligent and he's giving you the right tips, fine. But if someone's talking to you about your life, about your personal life, about emotional life, and about issues that we struggle with, love and pain, and dealing with all the different challenges in life, there you don't want to have a speaker who doesn't have that type of humble channel. You don't need to be hearing some arrogant guy or woman pontificating or preaching to you about ideas because they think they're smart. Their resonance matters. As the expression goes, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And if someone feels that the person speaking to them cares, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt. They'll participate and cooperate in the communication. And if they don't think you care, it doesn't matter how much you know. You're not going to overwhelm somebody just because you're brilliant. So that's a key thing. And regarding to the discussion we're having here, as the introduction I was giving, is that the relevance, looking for the relevant message that addresses issues in our personal lives. So for me, this has been always my focus. Even though there are many ways to teach a Torah class, you can teach it by going through the commentaries and comparing commentaries and the cross commentaries and the arguments and counter arguments, etc., etc. There's the Talmudic approach, there's Jewish law. There are so many dimensions to any Torah concept, but I feel that this, to me, is the most important challenge, is dealing with the relevant aspect. The analysis of the commentaries and the other details, technical details, it's relatively easy to do on your own. If not, there are, I'm sure, good classes for that. But the relevance, I don't find that being emphasized enough, and that to me is the foundation of it all. Because if it's not relevant, who really cares what the commentaries have to say, and the counter arguments and arguments and so on. So with that type of challenge, so to speak, and as I say this to all of you, this is a tool that anything you look at life is always good to ask the question: how is that relevant to me? So instead of just taking for granted that you're doing things because you just do it, which is a lot of what we do, our habits and routines, we just do them. And then when you get into trouble, then you step back and say, why am I doing it in the first place? So it would be a good habit to develop, is to challenge your own habits and routines, and by asking, why am I doing this? Why is this relevant to my life? Just because I've been doing it all these years. And the same can be applied to Torah ideas. So we read this week's chapter, every week in the year, 52 weeks of the year have a corresponding Torah chapter. So 52 chapters, 52 weeks. And each chapter has 7 sections, 7 days of the week. So in effect, every day of the year has its corresponding section. So we are now in the 4th book of the Torah, the book of Numbers, or Bamidbar. And in the chapter, the 5th chapter, the 5th chapter called Korach. Now, Korach, as you may know, was the ultimate mutineer, and led a rebellion against Moses and Aaron. That's how the chapter begins. Vayikach Korach, and Korach took. That's the word, he took. Dosam Aviram, his cohorts, his co-conspirators. And they stood up and they rose before Moses with 250 men. And they rose, and basically their argument was, led by Korach, why did you take leadership? What gave you the right to be the leaders? Aren't all the people, Kulam Gudashim, the entire nation, are holy? Madua Tisnasu. Why did you lift yourself up and appoint yourself and assume yourself this leadership? In a way, this may be the first documented case of a class struggle, of challenge against the classes, against leadership, against leaders. The first rebellion documented, Korach. And the chapter continues in a long, detailed elaboration of how Moses turns to God, very disturbed by this challenge. Because it wasn't coming from a simple man. Korach was as Rashi says, Korach was a pikach, a very shrewd, very sharp mind. Korach was actually a Levite. He was from the aristocratic family. He was a cousin of Moses. So it wasn't coming from just some guy. Even anyone has a right to challenge, but Korach especially. So finally, the Torah goes through elaborate detail how God tells Moses to prove that he actually did choose Aaron and chose Moses. Go through a whole detailed story of how that was proven, and the tragic end of the story of how Korach and his men ultimately perish. But here, the question of relevance immediately jumps out at us, like in any episode. Why do we need to know the story? Who cares? I mean, it may have some intriguing drama to know that back then, a few thousand years ago, there was a man called Korach, and he led a rebellion, and the leadership of Moses was confirmed and ratified, and so on. But what's the relevance to us? And why is it relevant to know the whole story of how he challenged? Under the end of the day, he was wrong. So why does the Torah have to elaborate and so to speak? The Torah, it says in the Talmud, the Torah is so careful in how it speaks even about animals. It won't call an animal an impure animal. A tameya, it will say eina tahir, it's not pure. It will say it in a more sensitive and in a more subtle form. So the Torah goes out of its way. That's what it says. Ikam hakosov. The Torah will change words in order not to insult even an animal. So why hear suddenly the story of Korach? Why do we need to know the whole story in the first place? You want to say that you could say briefly there was a challenge and leadership was confirmed and so on. But the whole story is told to us in detail. Clearly, that there's many lessons in here. And there are many answers to the relevance. I'm going to focus on one particular one, and hence the title of this class is Your Life Fragmented. So here, one of the key things in finding relevance is you have to always look at the verse and find those oddities or seemingly strange words that are usually the key to giving us the deeper message. Now, the story is the story, but as I said, it can very easily be dismissed as a story that happened, this would be almost 3,300 years ago, in the wilderness, in a different time and a different place, with people we don't even personally know. And as I said, easily, it's not relevant. I mean, it's relevant only as far as our history, perhaps, but relevant in our personal lives, that this can compete with the things that you do every day on a daily basis, what newspapers you read, the books, the movies, the entertainment, the work you do. The challenge is, can one explain a chapter like this in ways that are as important, if not more important, and relevant than other things that you're doing? And that's the key. If you can't do that, frankly, we'll have lost the war. Why would anyone want to embrace a Torah that's not relevant, or a Torah that there are things that seemingly more relevant to us than a story like this? And this is just applying it to this chapter. The same question can be applied to all, as I mentioned before. Now, as I said, the key thing is to look at words or at phrases that jump out. And one obvious question is the word vayikach Korach. What does it mean that vayikach Korach, he took? When you take something in Hebrew, the word took. Look how they took it. Took. What does it mean that he took? What did he take? If it was referring that he gathered together, then you wouldn't use the word vayikach. You would say vayikal, or there are other terms of gathering people together and leading a mutiny. What did he take? Taking usually refers to some object. So Rashi says, some of them, Rashi says, that took means he took issue with. It doesn't mean literally took. He took issue with. He took himself and placed himself on a side. This is Moses and Aaron. This is the conventional or the chosen leaders, and I do not agree. So he, so to speak, took himself aside, or took himself out of the picture. Which doesn't necessarily, it explains technically the word, but it would have been far easier to use a much simpler word. What's the point, vayikach? So the Targum, you may have heard of Onkelos. Onkelos was actually a convert who became one of the most brilliant commentators. Long before Rashi, he was the first commentator on the Torah, actually. Rashi was in later centuries, the 10th century. Onkelos lived in the early centuries, like 2nd or 3rd century. And Onkelos translated the whole Torah in Aramaic, which you'll find in most Chumash, in the Chumash, you'll find it on the left side of the text. You'll see Onkelos. It became part and parcel of almost every Bible printed has every Torah printed has Onkelos on it. Targum Onkelos, it's called. Targum means translation. But in translating, as we all know, translation is never just translation. It also includes commentary, because there are words that in Hebrew can be literally translated, so you have to find another word. So the interesting thing is, he uses, when he says Vayikach, how does he translate it into Aramaic? He translated by using Vispalig Kerach. Vayikach means that he went to war, basically, that he separated himself, which is the meaning of Rashi as well, but he uses a very blatant word, Vispalig. The Kerach, Vispalig means like, if you know, in Aramaic there's a word plukta. Plukta in Aramaic means a battle, a disagreement. But it actually means to separate yourself from, to split from something. It's a form of splitting apart. Which here, now it already begins to become more of an intriguing question. What is he splitting exactly? In other words, it would imply that before Korach there was a certain unity, and Korach broke something apart, or fragmented something. So you don't need to be a brilliant, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that when you think in those terms. So look around in our lives. I mean, this is a methodology of how one takes a verse and applies it to our lives. You look around in our lives, where do we find things that are either unity or split? So you can think of it in terms, even in scientific terms, you can say that science is essentially the search for unity. The ultimate search is for the unified field theory that Einstein desperately tried to find and couldn't. Until this day, they haven't yet found it. Unified field theory, what does that mean? It means that once upon a time, before we understood the forces that shape and define natural events, so each event was a separate event. An earthquake here, thunder, lightning there, the sun rising, the moon rising, all the cosmic changes and all the different things that we observed in the empirical universe were all separate entities. Science, essentially, to put it in the simplest of terms, is looking for some law of nature that you can, under that law, can explain many different phenomena. So it's taking fragments of a universe that can be on its own, when we look at it, it may seem all disjointed and disconnected, and finding something that connects it all together. That's really, in essence, what science is. And once you understand the law, then you can predict, then you can dissect, and you can also manipulate, because you understand what's shaping, not just the results, the symptoms. You understand what are the forces that are shaping existence. So scientists have broken down to four. It was ultimately the four laws they call the gravity, electromagnetism. It's called the nuclear strong force and the weak force. But no one has yet found that one law that all those four can be explained. That gravity can be explained together with, let's say, quantum mechanics. That still eludes scientists. But they search for it. Now, no one really knows why things have to be unified. But everything in our observation and everything from the beginning of time dictates that there is an ultimate inherent unity to everything in existence. To bring it a little closer to home, let's just look at ourselves. Look at your own body. So there's an actual expression, "Mepsari erzelaka," from my flesh I behold God. You look at your own flesh, meaning your own body. What is a healthy body, essentially? It's a unified entity. It's an integrated circuit, so to speak. It has hundreds, if not, and actually thousands of systems and organs. It has billions and trillions of cells. 75 trillion cells, they estimate, are in the human body. There are around 100 trillion microbes just in your gut. So you're talking about a massive amount. But what does health mean? Health means when things are working, that all these different systems, though if you separated them, you'd never imagine they can work together, are all coordinated under one roof. They're all coordinated in one machine called your body. And being that the human being is a small universe, look at the larger universe, the same is true. Until a human being intervenes and upsets the balance of nature, nature is perfect symmetry. Obviously it goes through changes, seasons, and there are predators and prey, and there are storms and what we call natural disasters. But in nature it's all part of a process. If human beings were not in the way, You know how many earthquakes take place a year? They say every 10 seconds there's an earthquake somewhere under the water. And as a matter of fact, it's understood that an earthquake is necessary. It keeps the balance of the earth and the cooling of the earth. If there weren't earthquakes, there weren't no tornadoes and hurricanes and tsunamis, we would not exist. The disaster is when human beings are on the path of these storms. But the storms themselves are part of the so-called ecosystem that cleanses, that washes out, rains, winds. It's like a built-in car wash, for the earth. You have waters and you have winds. You have everything you need. Vacuum cleaners, everything you need. Everything we copy and artificially emulate is from nature. So nature is this diverse systems, but all working in a certain harmony, like one choreographer aligning it all together, one cap. So essentially, unity is in essence, really what we call health. A healthy human being, a healthy world, a healthy system. And when we build, let's say, businesses, and we build artificial structures, we emulate this unity. Here's a building. A building has to have a foundation and has floors, and it's built in a cohesive way. The only entity that can create chaos is us. Nature never creates chaos. Even chaos theory, just to throw that in, is also considered part of an organized system. I know it sounds weird, but chaos theory is a theory that is based on laws and formulas and so on. Only the human being can upset the balance, and the way the Torah puts it is because we have free will. We can choose to create unhealthy situations, dysfunctional situations. Our selfishness can disturb the balance. And Korach epitomized this challenge. So when this was Spala Korach, Vayikach Korach, those two words was the key to the whole story. Korach was challenging the unified structure. But the question is, why did he challenge it? I mean, he was a smart man. Why would he challenge something like this? What disturbed him? Clearly there's something there that is important to look at, and it's important for us to know. That's why the story is told to us. Even though he ended up being wrong, but you can't say he was totally wrong, or else the Torah would not have documented his mutiny. The Torah does not necessarily document every time someone had a complaint and everything, something that only documents if there's some value to learn from it. So there is value, there's much value. Because Korach's argument was actually very legitimate. His argument was, let's go now to the core of the argument. He was saying, I understand that in other systems, in other nations, there's a king, and there's a hierarchy and leadership. But we are people under God. And in the face of God, we are all equals. So why is there leadership? Why is there a hierarchy in Jewish life? This question is a very legitimate question. So if it was a man-made system, we could understand, okay, whoever's the boss is the boss. They got the money. Misha yeshla hamei yeshla hadeya, they say. The one who has the money has the say. In Hebrew it rhymes. And that's that. Too bad. You don't want to work for him, because choose another location. People who became monarchs, kings, either through war or through power or through money or through killing others, whatever it is. But here we are people under God. So he says, we've been told that we are all holy people. When we stood at Mount Sinai, it said, "V'atem tili, you shall be for me a kingdom of priests, v'goy kodesh, and a holy nation." This is the whole point of the Torah. And the Torah is based on equality. All human beings are created in the divine image. I'm just elaborating on Korach's argument. So what is this hierarchy here? Why is there Moses and Aaron? Why? And you don't find an actual answer, actually. You just find that he was wrong. The reason is because his argument is legitimate. The way he went about the argument and the conclusions he came to, that was the problem. And this leads us to the key thing in this whole story. So let's go back now to the issue of, and we'll bring it back obviously to our personal lives after we analyze it some more. So what goes back to, what is it that the key element that you can have such diversity and such harmony in nature and in our own human systems? Again, until human being upsets the balance. How is that possible? How is it possible? 75 trillion cells. That's a big number. Can you find 75 people that agree about anything? Let alone 75 trillion? We have wars that rage throughout history, different opinions, and you see kinds of conflicts exist. So how could so many forces and systems all work in one direction? Now, if they were clones and it was all one dimension, one cell, okay, there's no other option. So if one person on Earth, he has no one to argue with. Even though I'm sure someone can find, real arguers can find someone to argue with even if there's no one else around. Like those 2 Jews in Afghanistan, they say, true story, that one of them recently died. But when they came to Afghanistan, they found 2 Jews there, but they don't speak to each other. Because each one thinks he's the head of the community. Now there's only a community of 2. But that's what it is. I guess they felt there's potential. Afghanistan may be a future market, But regardless, so if everything was one color, one cell, one personality, okay, no arguments. Then there's no issue, there's no possibility for conflict. But how could you have so many forces together and all working in one direction, all working toward one objective? What's the logic behind it, and how can we so-called package that? How can we emulate that? What's the formula? So the formula comes down to is the word that I often use in this class called bittul. Bittul. Bittul literally means to suspend yourself, to commit to something greater than yourself. What it comes down to is that all these forces don't have to cease being themselves. Because if the heart is not going to be a heart, God forbid, or the mind is not a mind, and all cells are not going to do what they have to do, you're not going to have health. They must have their unique personality. But they have one ingredient that changes everything. Have your unique personality, but realize that you're part of a bigger picture. It's not about you. If any one of those cells, for any given moment, suddenly thinks, I'm the center of the universe, then you have havoc. Then you have disaster. That's actually, without going into the, I don't like to bring up anything more, but that's what cancer is. Where the cells begin to fight, eat each other up. And healthy cells start multiplying, and that's called destruction. It's a form of selfishness if you think about it. Now, it's not selfish in the choice, not like the cells have choice, but that's what's happening. Or when any other, what ultimately is a disease? A disease, any type of disease, illness, accident that causes something that's unhealthy is basically a blockage. It's either blocking a flow of blood or of other vital or air and so on, or oxygen, or there's something else that is suddenly becoming an entity of its own, a growth that's focusing on itself. What is an infection at the end of the day? It's a growth that is robbing valuable resources from the rest of the body. Even the white blood cells and the immune system have to all come into battle to fight this infection. It's a form of selfishness. What is health? Health is nobody is center stage here. Everyone's doing their role. No one's compromised either. But everything senses, every aspect senses that I'm part of a choreographed symphony. On one instrument. Look at a symphony. You could have 100 people on stage, and each one plays their instrument. You have a conductor. You see, without a conductor, I've asked the question several times, people who do this, what do you need a conductor? They all can read the music. And they're trained, but without the conductor, there's going to be something missing. The conductor keeps a certain balance and change in the tempo, etc., etc. But each is playing their own instrument, very different instruments. On your own, you'd never think they could all be coordinated, and then what comes out is magic, beauty. This is the key, because each one knows they have a role to play, but then nobody thinks they're the center. When they have to stop playing, someone else begins. And that's also part of their success. It's not like, I'm not playing, what? Well, a musician will say, hey, 1 second, why should I stop? I'd like to continue playing. Because he understands the next instrument or the next stage of the symphony enhances the stage that he played. It becomes a type of cross-pollinating system that everything feeds each other and everything feeds off each other. It's essentially harmony within diversity, which is the essential definition of what beauty is. People look for definition of beauty. Google it, check it out. What is beauty? And nobody has really ever quantified what is beauty. How do you define beauty? So we have beauty in the eyes of the beholder. That statement, which essentially means it's subjective. But what is beauty? So I'll tell you the translation of beauty in Hebrew. Beauty in Hebrew is called tiferet. Sometimes hoid, But Tiferet is beauty. Tiferet in the spheres works like this. There's Chesed, there's Gvura, there's Tiferet. Chesed is love, kindness. It's associated usually with water, the color white, blue. Gvura is its antithesis. If Chesed is water and kindness, Gvura is withholding instead of flowing. So its symbolism associates with fire, with red, color red, intensity, aggression. It's also necessary. But the question now is, how do these two reconcile? So the Kabbalah comes and explains that there's a third dimension, it's called the third path, and that's the reconcile, that's the mediator. Tiferet. Tiferet creates a fusion between Chesed and Gvura. And that's called beauty. So beauty is harmony within diversity. And this you'll find across the board, you'll find it throughout the Torah, you'll find it in the Bible when you talk about the creation of the world. So you talk about the creation of the 6 days and then Shabbos, the seventh day. So the first day is Chesed. Let there be light. It was light, like light is a flow of energy. The second day was separation. Korach connects to day 2. Separation between the higher and the lower. God separated the higher waters and the lower waters, the higher heavens and the water and the lower and separation. So it's Gevura, it's separation. It's necessary because now you need to have distinction. Day 1 alone, everything is one. It's one clone. There's no distinction. There's no diversity. Day 2 creates diversity, and day 3 is Tiferet. Day 3 creates fusion. So you have the expression we say in the morning prayers about verses. There's one verse, 2 verses that contradict each other. Comes the third verse and reconciles. The mediator. True mediation is not compromise. It's not that you give a little, I give a little, and then the mediator says you give a little, the party 2 gives a little, and that way we come to peace. That's one form of mediation. The best mediation is that you find a common ground that the two couldn't find on their own, and they realize that they complement each other without compromising each other. That is the ultimate beauty. So what is beauty? When you say a beautiful face, or you say a beautiful sight, or a beautiful piece of music. What defines beauty? Beauty defined that you'll find in all beauty, you'll find there's never one dimension. To say, for example, the color blue is beautiful, you may like maybe your favorite color, or red or green or whatever color is your favorite color. But you can't call it beautiful, it just says, I like it. Beauty requires diversity. A face, what makes a face beautiful? The eyes, the nose, the mouth, or all of the sum total of them all. So yes, a person can have beautiful eyes, a person can have beautiful complexion, have beautiful different components, but there's something that's like a synergy. It's more than the sum of the parts. There's a symmetry. You'll find those that analyze what's the perfect face, how far distant the eyes are from each other, the size of the nose, where the mouth is, and so on. There's a symmetry that's pleasant to the eye that we define as beauty. It's always a form of symmetry. This doesn't contradict the fact that our beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, because symmetry can be seen in different ways by different people. But generally speaking, it's about that type of balance and symmetry that defines beauty. So the words are harmony within diversity. But therein lies a great challenge, because if in day 1 there was no counter argument, there was only one. This is why the Torah says day 1 is called Yom Echad. The Medrash says, why is it called Yom Echad? One day, day 1. It should have said Yom Rishon, like the other days. Yom Rishon means the first day. Yom Shein is the second day, the third day. So you say first, second, third. Here it goes. No, it says day 1, then it goes second, third, because oneness prevailed. Day 2. Now you have the birth of diversity. It's necessary for existence, as we shall soon elaborate, but it all now has potential for conflict. Because take that diversity and disorganize it. Take those musical instruments, those musical notes, or those colors, and disorganize them, then it creates something that's very disturbing to us. One color, blue, may not be called beauty, but it's never disturbing. When you mix a whole bunch of colors or a whole bunch of notes, and in the wrong way, it can be very disturbing. It's very what's the word I want to use? Disconcerting. When you see something that does not look cohesive, that looks chaotic. It's like, let's say you come into your home, or you come into your desk and you finally find the whole mess. Something that always bothers us, because we look for order in every given situation. But it's necessary to have this diversity. So harmony, Tiferet, has the potential. Beauty means it has to have the potential for the opposite of beauty. The same 75 trillion cells, or the same pieces of the symphony, should they not coordinate, then you can create real problems. Whereas only one entity can never cause real problems. How bad can one call? Your one musical note cannot be beautiful, but it'll just be a monotonous sound that just goes on and on, drones on and on. But mix a bunch of sounds together in the wrong way, it becomes irritating, grating. Like they say, what's worse than hearing one person sing off tune? Two people singing off tune. If you've ever seen this, I've had the honor of experiencing this many times, and you'll see it can get worse than one person singing off tune. So there's that element of, there's that, it can go both directions. So here, let's go now back to Korach. So Korach is making a very strong argument. Everyone is equal in the eyes of God. Why is there a hierarchy? Why did you take power? Your leaders. Everybody is a leader. Ironically, Korach at the same time, a few sentences later, says, and I want to be the leader. No. What was Korach's point was well taken, and he was correct. We are all equals. So then why do we have a hierarchy? Why do we have teachers? Why do we need a Moses? The answer is because we are not all bottle. We may all be equal, and we all have our unique role to play. But what teaches us that ingredient that I mentioned before that's going to create harmony? You need bittul. You need to be taught that. And that's where a teacher comes into play. And this brings me back to the introduction I gave at the beginning of the class, which wasn't really an introduction, it's about this point. What was the true communication of Moses? Not that Moses was a great man and telling everybody I'm so great and God chose me. It was actually, he was completely humble. He couldn't even speak clearly. He was complete channel, a mouthpiece for God. And that was Korach's mistake. He projected. You see, Korach, he was a great man, but he projected and did not understand or appreciate the depth of Moses' humility. So he thought to himself, if I was a leader, then I'd probably feel better and greater than everyone around me. And that's what he was challenging. He did not realize that Moses did not feel he was greater than anybody. As the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneur Zalman, says, in explaining the verse, that Moses was the humblest man that ever walked on earth. So he says, what means he was humble? And he explains it with two expressions in Hebrew. In Hebrew, the word for humility is anav, anova. Anav means humble. But there's another word in Hebrew called shafel. Shafel means a person of low self-esteem. A person who feels that he's a lowly person. What's the difference between low self-esteem and humility? They can look the same. You look at someone who's quiet in the face of, let's say, other people speaking. Is this a person of low self-esteem, or is this a humble person? You may not be able to tell on the person's face. What is the difference? And it's a fundamental difference. Humility is strength, and low self-esteem is weakness. Humility is empowering, and low self-esteem is demoralizing. A person of low self-esteem basically is saying, I have no value. I feel worthless, self-loathing, or whatever other words a person may use, and I'm not worthy. A humble person is not living in delusion. A humble person knows fully well his strengths. Moses knew every strength of his. He knew who he was. He was quite self-aware. He knew that God chose him. He knew his strengths. He knew what he was able to accomplish. He wasn't delusional. That's not what humility is. What did he say to himself, however? These are not my strengths. These are given to me by God. Had God given them to someone else, this is the beautiful insight from Reb Shneur Zalman, they would have done better than I did. That's a humble person. He never ever thinks that it's about himself. It's not that someone doesn't know his strengths. That's delusional. That's false. That's not right. The person of low self-esteem is actually arrogant in a strange way, in an inverted way. Why is he arrogant? Because look who thinks he's nobody. Who gave you the right to say you're nobody? God created you and gave you skills and tools and make you unique, and you decided you're no one. It's a strange form of arrogance. It's like you decided that you're nothing. Like, the classic joke about the rabbi who on Yom Kippur is like standing in a corner and beating his chest and says, I'm nothing, I'm nothing, I'm nothing, His Gabbai, his second in command, is doing the same thing. Nobody, I'm nothing, I'm nothing. Then some simple guy comes in and sees them both doing it, so he also says, I'm nobody, I'm nobody, I'm nothing. So the Gabbai turns to the rabbi and says, look who thinks he's nobody, Okay, that's meant to be a joke. Fine. I guess it was the delivery. Or maybe I won't use it again. That's funnier than the original joke. I like that. That's good. Yeah. Not insulted. So this was Korach's mistake. We project. When we think about others, we think about them as we would think about ourselves. It's hard for us to imagine someone completely different than ourselves. One of the mistakes we always make. Because we say, if I was in that person's shoes, I probably would do something similar. Maybe not completely. They tell the joke, well, this is a joke, it's not a laughing joke, but it's just a metaphor, so to speak. So there was this cow, Elsie, the cow, on the farm. And Elsie would be given, every day would be given water to drink, but her special, most favorite day was Sunday morning. Why? Because after Shabbos, and all the greasy food that was eaten, so the maid who would clean, after she would clean the pots, the water from all the cholents that were left and so on, she would put outside and the cow would drink it. So it was far richer water than every day. Every day was just plain water. Anyway, one Shabbos came, the maid couldn't come around, so someone else filled in her shoes, and they washed out the pots and forgot to put it out for the cow. So the cow refused to give milk. Why? Because the cow felt that the maid drank up her water. That the cow felt that, there's such delicious water, then the maid decided to drink it herself. Why? Because that's what a cow thinks. A cow thinks on its terms. That, who's going to go drink such water, obviously. But the cow knows how special it is. He thinks that if someone drank it, must be that they couldn't stand that I took it, so they are my competition. We project many things. And Korach, in his wisdom, not in his foolishness, in his greatness and wisdom, assumed that a leader means that in some way has a tinge of sense of self, and therefore he thinks he's a little better than everybody else. So he was correct in what he said, that everyone is equal. But he was not incorrect that everybody's equal in their awareness of their strengths. You see, Moses was chosen by God because he knew how to teach as a role model. He taught what bittul was. You don't need much to realize it. When you look at the end of the Chumash, right, the end of the Torah, the last verse, one of the most moving sentences you'll ever read, when it talks about the Torah saying goodbye to Moses. He goes up on the mountain. So the last words talks about how he was the only man that ever spoke to God face to face, like one speaks to a friend. And then the last line goes, and to Moses, to all the signs and the wonders that Moses did before all the Jews. That's the last sentence, the last words in the entire Torah. We read it on Simchas Torah, and that we conclude the whole Chumash. Einei Kol Yisrael Lamed, and as some of you may know, that connects to the base of Bereshis, the beginning. So you have Lev, heart. So Rashi commentary says, what did Moses do? What is the Torah referring to? Obviously, he did many things. He took the Jews out of Egypt, Torah at Sinai, parting of the sea. Before that, the miracles that happened 40 years in the wilderness. But Le'enei Kol Yisrael seems to say that he did something special. And Rashi, strangely, citing a medrash, brings something which is very odd. He says, what did he do before all the eyes, the Einei Kol Yisrael that everybody saw? He broke the tablets. And God said to him, thank you for breaking the tablets. This is the last Rashi in Chumash, in the whole Torah, which from beginning to end doesn't make any sense. You can't find any miracles that Moses did that are positive. Of all things Rashi chooses is the breaking of the tablets. We know the breaking of the tablets happens to be not a positive thing. As a matter of fact, it's one of the first greatest tragedies in Jewish history. It was because they built the golden calf. We fast on the day that they broke the tablets, the 17th of Tammuz. So what is this exactly? It almost sounds like a joke. No, because this was the greatest thing that Moses did. Why? Why did he break the tablets? So mistakenly, most people think because he got angry. So he lost control, so he threw the tablets to the ground. Now, if you know anything a little about a man with wisdom of intelligence of Moses, doesn't just suddenly lose control and throws tablets on the ground. You can imagine that. It's not so he lost it or something like that. We all know that one of the great tragedies, if a Torah scroll, God forbid, falls on the floor by accident, it's considered a bad omen. And a community will fast. And there's all kinds of things that people do if a Torah scroll falls by mistake. Now, this was not a Torah scroll. These were the tablets. This was tablets written by God and engraved by God and chosen. So Moses is suddenly going to take tablets and throw them down. Would be the equivalent of a rabbi taking the Sefer Torah, and not just a rabbi, Moses, and throwing it down. So why did he throw down the tablets? So Rashi elsewhere explains, fascinating reason. It was all to save the people. See, the tablets were the marriage contract. The Sinai was a marriage. Yom Chasanos is Zamat Torah. Torah is compared to marriage. The Sinai was like a canopy. That's why we have a canopy by the wedding. It's symbolic of Mount Sinai. Now, at Sinai, they just had heard the 10 Commandments, right? On Shavuos, just a few weeks ago. We commemorate 3,325 years since that happened. They heard the commandment: do not have other gods, do not worship false gods, other gods. 39 days later, they go ahead and build a golden calf. They defy the cardinal sin. Now, the interesting thing is, Moses had not yet brought the tablets to them. They had only heard it. They heard what it said in the contract, but they didn't sign the contract. They didn't receive the contract. So Moses, like a good advocate and lawyer, what he did was, he threw the tablets down to tear up the contract, so then he can go back to God and say, okay, listen, they heard it, but they didn't sign it. I never delivered it to them. What does this take for a human being to do something like that? Besides the innovation of it, he took the tablets, a Torah which is called the Torah of life. It's a divine God's wisdom, all in order to help save the Jewish people. Now, that is considered the greatest of all things Moses did. Greater than all the miracles. Because all the miracles were, okay, took the Jews out of Egypt. The other things, great. But this, he put himself at risk. Because he's taken the book of life. As we know in another place, when God says he won't forgive the people, Moses says, erase my name from this book of life. Now, Moses wasn't part of the crime. He was up in heaven when this happened. He was up in the mountain. So he had no way they could implicate him. And yet he says, erase my name. Well, you know what that means? That means he wasn't ready just to sacrifice his body. He's ready to sacrifice his soul, his future, his spiritual destiny, in order to save the people. This is unprecedented. This is why Yom Kippur is the holiest day in the year, because that's when Moses returns with hope and with the promise and the second tablets. But that's not for right now. That's a separate discussion. I've discussed it other times. But this is ultimate act of humility. This Korach was not on this level. He was a great man, Korach. But such humility only a Moses had. And that's why Moses' words live on today. Because Moses wasn't talking about himself. He didn't care about himself at all. He's ready to... Many of us may sacrifice our money. We may sacrifice our comforts for another person. Even that, you're not going to find every day and everyone doing. But let's say we'll find some people have that selflessness. But someone's ready to sacrifice their soul, sacrifice their place in heaven, their place near God. And a person like Moses who knew what it means to be near God, that you don't find. And that is why we have a leader. Not because in Judaism, leaders are not because they're greater, because they have more power, they have more horses, more women, more wealth, more conquest. In Judaism, the exact opposite. A leader is defined by what he does not have, not by what he does have. Defined by bittul. The less he has, the greater the leader. The less he thinks he's somebody, the greater channel he is. How did God test Moses to be leader of the people? With being a shepherd. He saw how Moses took care of sheep. Moses was a shepherd for his future father-in-law. With thousands of sheep were grazing. The Medrash says one day, Moses noticed one sheep was missing, which itself is interesting. He noticed one sheep among thousands. Went to look for it, found it a way away. What do you say? A distance away. At a brook of water, the sheep was thirsty. And Moses lifted the sheep, put it on his shoulders, and carried it back to the flock. Nobody's watching. Nobody knows. And God says, but God is watching. God said, if that's what a man can do for one sheep, this is the man I want to lead my people. And since then, Moses is called a shepherd. That's why he's called Raya Neman, faithful shepherd. This is a leader. So number one lesson we learn from Korach's message is very important. That's why we're told. The message of Korach is that yes, everyone is equal. But that doesn't mean we know it, and doesn't mean we know how to deal with it without the lesson of ingredient of humility. Because if everyone's equal, on our own, we also have another side. It's called being selfish. We also have self-absorption. How do you balance yourself and your needs and another's needs if we're all equal? It's a very important question. It's a question that is debated till this very day. Democracy, freedom. Do we live in a true democracy? Can anyone do whatever they like? No, it's not correct. You can't go do something that hurts another. There are laws about that. Even hurting yourself, there are certain laws. In our society, we've determined that if someone gets up on a bridge or wants to commit suicide, God forbid, they'll mobilize all the forces to stop him from doing it, or her. Why? You can say, I have no family, I want to do this, it's my own business. Because we see that as being destructive to society. I'm not debating the issue right now. The point is, there's no such thing as total freedom if you're going to infringe on someone else's rights. So the debates rage. Issues like pornography or issues of other moral standards, the Supreme Court doesn't want to rule on it. Every community should decide what is acceptable. And we still don't have an exact balance of what right do you have, and what happens if that right infringes on another person. Where is the exact balance? But one thing that Torah's approach to it is, everyone is unique and everyone is holy in the eyes of God. But we need to be trained, to be taught how to have humility. And when we add that ingredient, then there'll be harmony. So what Korach did was, he challenged not hierarchy, the unhealthy hierarchy, yes, to rebel against an unhealthy monarch, or someone that is arrogant, or someone that is, how does Camus put it, that the ultimate sign of rebellion is that your very existence is seen as rebellious. As soon as you see a rebellion against a dysfunctional monarch or against an unhealthy monarch is healthy. So what Korach was challenging was an unhealthy hierarchy should be challenged, and you need to have the chutzpah of a mutiny of Korach to not allow the status quo to be acceptable, and that when we see something is wrong, we can challenge authorities. His mistake was that he chose the wrong authority here. This, in this case, happened to be the humblest one, the key to understanding and helping everyone appreciate this harmony. In other words, not only was Moses not part of a hierarchy that created an imbalance, it was a part of the hierarchy that created balance. Which explains why we need teachers. Someone will say, children will get up and rise and say, you know what? We need no education, we need no parents, we're all equals, we'll just do whatever we want. Now, it may not be that bad, actually, if they do that in our day and age. But why do we children need education, direction? Because even though we're all unique, we have to learn how to harness it. We have to learn how to coexist. We have to learn how to reach harmony. Bittul. So the role of leaders in Judaism, the hierarchy of Aaron and Moses, is not to show there's someone that's an authority, that's in a power position of power. It's to teach how there can be real harmony within diversity. And Korach challenged that. That's Vayikach Korach. He took. They tell that joke about, I think I mentioned a few weeks ago here. This Jimmy falls into the water and he's drowning, and he's about to go under. So John walks by and stretches out his hand, and he says to him, he says to him, give me your hand, and he refuses. He says, give me your hand, you're about to drop. He refuses. So finally someone comes by and says, listen, Jim never learned how to give. Say, take my hand, and you'll see that he'll take my hand. She said, take my hand, and then he grabbed his hand. He knows how to take, he doesn't know how to give. So when you say, give me your hand, that's not up to him, but take my hand. Vayikach Korach said, take. It was about him. That was the thing. I'm taking. That's not the way you create the unity. That is how you create disunity. So Korach, ironically, in his argument that we're all equals, but he was saying it in a way that actually created inequality, because he was lacking bittul. As I said, the key to balance the two forces is that you have to have, everything has to be unique, but you can't be a taker, you have to be a giver. That's the key. The 75 trillion cells know they're givers, and that's how they take. They take by giving. If you don't know how to give, then you'll not. Then if you take when you shouldn't be taking, you're going to destroy the balance. That's what it comes down to. That any harmonious situation is because all the forces are givers. They all have that ingredient of bittul that I'm discussing here. So vayikach karach was the opposite. To take, have is an expression in the Zohar where it says it's like the klippa. The negative forces are always taking. They're parasites. They're takers, not givers. That is the ultimate opposite. That's the antithesis of bittul. Moses was a giver. He was an example, and as such, that's why he was able to be a leader that creates a unity. So this isn't about a hierarchy of who's in power, who's not. This is about lessons, modeling of what it means, what it takes to really be diverse and at the same time unified. So someone will say, let's say in the symphony, a musician will say, "Hey, I want to be the conductor." That was Korach. I want to be the conductor. You're playing your music. What do you do? You're not the conductor. Why are you arguing? Why are you saying that? Because he was projecting. He saw the conductor as being the leader. I want to be a leader. That's not what a leader is about. As a matter of fact, if he had looked at Moses carefully, he would see Moses actually did not want to be the leader. When God comes to him, he ran the other direction. And he insisted all the things I mentioned earlier, that I'm not a man of words. So how does this translate back now to our lives? So let's take our lives. I don't know how you see your life. If you think your life is a cohesive unit or scattered fragments or something in between. But there's some very easy litmus tests to figure that out. Make a list tonight or any time you like. Well, if you're ready to find something maybe a little unsettling and disconcerting, do this. If not, maybe don't do it. Depends on your level of denial. But make a list of everything you did today, from the morning till the evening. First of all, you probably won't even remember many things because they were so insignificant. But even if you do, then try to create a thread. Take a line through all these items and see how many things are connected to one another. I tested this. You're going to find around 150 items most people do a day. And I mean everything, from the moment you wake up to pressing the snooze button. You can count that as many times as you like. Then whatever it is, your regimen, exercising, showering, breakfast, praying, if that's in your regimen, getting dressed, brushing your teeth, grooming, etc., checking yourself in the mirror again and again. And I'm not going to go through the whole list. You could all do the list yourselves. And then comes, leaving your home, commuting, going to work, appointments, coffee breaks, tea breaks, lunch, reading a newspaper, reading a book, meeting a friend, phone calls, things random, things planned, things spontaneous. The list goes on. And you list it all. And then try, as I said, make a connection. See how many things are connected. You're going to find, in most cases, very few are connected. If anything, they may be loosely connected. Like you can say, I commuted to work. So there's a connection between your commute and the work. You couldn't get there without commuting. But many things will just be a whole bunch of separate entities. Now, if you're running a business and your workers told you that's how their schedule looks like a day, you'd fire them. Because that's not how you create efficiency. Efficiency means that your hours are accounted for. Everything is going toward the work. Obviously 9 to 5 people have a lunch break and so on, but you're focused towards a certain mission. In our personal lives, we have no such accountability. And you see, in a business without a mission, a unifying mission that connects all the cells, like I said, 75 trillion cells, you need a mission statement that says, this is the mission that drives this company. So someone wakes up one morning and says, you know what? I want to do something else. No, that's off the reservation. You're not aligned with what our mission is. Now, companies struggle with this. Sometimes they go off course and a lot of money is wasted and the resources wasted and so on. So in a company, it's not going to work if you do that for too long, because incohesiveness creates inefficiency. Inefficiency is waste. Waste means loss of money. At some point, someone's going to have to answer for that. In our personal lives, who has the accountability? But the damage is equal. A disjointed life filled with fragments doesn't sound like much in one day, but it accumulates. Day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, decade, century, millennia. And suddenly you have millions of fragments. It would be the equivalent of having cells in your body that are full of fragments and don't speak to each other. What would happen? God forbid, that is called, what I said before, that's called disease, lack of health, death even. So in a very interesting way, we may be killing ourselves psychologically, emotionally, through these fragments of our lives, because there are a bunch of pieces that are not connected in any given way. The reason we don't feel it necessarily is because, number one, we have a lot of resilience. We can take a lot. Number two, there's no accountability. There's no money. It's not being measured by resources of money. What happens is it implodes. It begins to eat away at you, erode within. And that's a fragmented life. So fragmented life doesn't mean necessarily that you're feeling disturbed or things seem out of control. As a matter of fact, if you're feeling that already, that's already a good sign. That means at least you're aware. The most fragmented lives are the ones that seem to be functional, what they call a functional addict. It seems to be functional. Everything seems to be working, even though it's not going any particular direction. So the years roll on, and you ask yourself, okay, what have I done with my life? So most of us are responsible for that. Well, I worked, and I made some money, and I saved some money, and I did this with it, and hopefully we had some healthy relationships on the side. But the end of the day is the type of question, what is your calling? And what is your mission? And how do all the details of your life line up to that require one important ingredient. It's not all about you. You have to have that ingredient of bittul that introduces this synchronicity. And that is, what is the higher calling, the higher mission that connects all these details? So in a human body, it's all the cells are functioning towards having a healthy life. But in our choice, because in our life, because we have free choice, we can choose to do different things that have no connection to one another, and not at all be driven by any type of conductor. We all become like Korach. Vayikach, we're takers. I take one thing, I take another, I'm hoarding, I have a whole collection. We collect. We're acquirers. We're acquirers of whatever it may be, of money, of material possessions, we want to control. And that idea of giving, or recognizing that you're here to serve, like Moses did, that you're here to serve something greater than yourself, that's the key to any type of true symmetry in a person's life. And there's no shortcuts. Either you have that calling or you don't have it. If you don't have it, then it's about you. If you have it, then it's about the cause. So I can't emphasize this enough, that having a cause in your life is the key to a healthy life. The fact that we can get away without it don't deceive yourself into thinking that you're getting away. It just means you're able to tolerate a lot of psychological disease. That's what it means. But to truly find a purposeful, meaningful life means being able to find that one force, that one voice, that one mission that overrides all the details. Not overrides, I would say, that synchronizes all those details. And then everything, from the way you wake up, tie your shoelaces, and exercise, or commute, are all directed toward that higher goal. Nothing is outside of that picture, which is essentially the concept of the opposite of what Korach. Korach was talking about separating, taking and separating. Day 2, Vispalik, he separates. And even though he was claiming they were all equal, but in truth, that all equal is really a separator. It would be like all the organs in the body coming together and say, you know what, we're all equal. That's all. Everyone's going to be the heart this week. Next week will all be the liver. Then will all be the mind. Then will all be the gallbladder, whatever it may be. That's not creating unity. Harmony within diversity. That's the key. And harmony within diversity needs bittul, needs an element of suspension of self. So Korach is talking about separation. And our mission is unity. So how does one unify all the details of their lives? So you have the concept that the Kabbalists, the mystics, Hasidic masters say, called elevating the sparks. Each of us is allocated with a certain amount of sparks in our lives. And they're scattered in your life, fragmented. In your home, in your work, the places you travel to, the people you know, they're all over the place. In your shower, in your bed, at your breakfast table, when you tie your shoelaces or whatever shoes you wear. Everywhere there are sparks. And everything you're doing is elevating the world or lowering it. Simple as that. You have that choice 24/7. Not just on Yom Kippur when you're in a holy mood or in some spiritual state, But every second of your life, you're either connecting the dots, or you're either part of the solution or part of the problem. Either you're connecting the dots, or you're keeping them separate or allowing them to stay separate. That's the challenge. So we're either fragmenters or we're uniters, unifiers. Think of it in human terms. When you meet people, so it's hard to probably gauge this, but do you think when you leave anyone you meet, do they feel drained by you or they feel empowered by you? Do they feel that you're trying to get something from them? Take, or to give? So we all know that good salesmanship is to make sure that the client thinks that you're giving and not taking. Yeah, but we all know the bottom line is you are taking, you just know how to take in a way that looks good. Or you could say it's mutual. So that's called a transaction. You get something, we get something. That's honest negotiations, no one's denying that. But it's still focused on really taking. You're not here to give, you're here to take. But in order to take, if you're an ethical person and you're also, it's a legitimate business, you give something. You give me the money, I'll give you something of value that you found valuable. So I'm not talking about necessarily manipulation or selling something that's a con job. But that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that wherever you are doing, even a transaction like that, there's an element of a spiritual dimension. I mentioned this, I believe. There's a businessman, big businessman in New York City, years ago. I don't know, he came to one of my classes, and he told me afterwards that my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, changed his life. He says he's a tough businessman, he's made a lot of money. And when he read the book, he read the chapter on work and money and so on, some light went off. Because it talks there about how to elevate your work. So he decided, based on the book, there's a suggestion that he should have a charity box on his desk. So in his executive desk, he's the CEO of the company, he has a charity box. So every meeting, he always ended, everybody gave a little charity into the box. Then he decided to give out a copy of my book to everybody at all the meetings. And he says it changed his whole business. Because till then the business was, dog eats dog, everyone's a shark, fine, we negotiate, everybody got the rules. He added, he said, an element into the discourse that he never thought is possible. Usually business is business. He added an element that anyone that came to see him, even if, became friendly, because there was this element of a certain spiritual dimension to it all. He said, it's not easy to do, because it's not the climate. People think of you a little corny or strange doing that. But it was very moving to me how he described it. He says, and actually created far deeper business relationships and trust with people, because they saw him as a human, not just as a taker and just a tough negotiator. That doesn't mean he doesn't negotiate. It doesn't mean that he's in any way compromised necessarily in his standards. But it doesn't end there. His relationship, he says, many relationships we ended up partnership. We ended, and we did not do business with each other, but we remained personal friends because of this, adding that dimension. So whatever it is that you're doing, you're connecting dots or you're separating them, or allowing them to stay separated. So in a way, you can say this: when you're born and you come to this earth, you're given a certain amount of scattered sparks. Think of it like scattered letters or scattered musical notes. And the question is, are you going to gather them together and play music? Are you going to gather them together and allow a certain melody, a certain story to be told? And that's a greater story than just survival and my needs being met. Let's face it, most people, they're focused on survival. What it takes to make me comfortable, to make them living, to make ends meet, and so on. That's the driving force most people are. You want to go to the extreme of that, the radical form of that is Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. The selfish gene. That every gene is selfish. It's all about survival of the fittest. And genes will do whatever it takes to survive. And I'm suggesting here, that's a Korach approach. Korach saw genes as selfish. And Moshe Rabbeinu splits, would say the genes are selfless. If they were selfish, we wouldn't have a healthy body. Then they would just destroy. What happens when selfish people come together? There's only a certain amount of time, and they're going to destroy each other. They may have mutual interest for a few moments, but you show me in history any selfish forces that were perpetuated. It's impossible. By definition, selfishness can't perpetuate. There's an expression the Mittler Rebbe once said that when two people come together, it's two divine souls against one animal soul. So the question is asked, why? It's two divine souls against two animal souls. Each of us has a divine soul and an animal soul. The animal soul is the selfish one, what I need. The divine soul is the transcendent one. So two people come together, 2 against 2. Why is it 2 against 1? You know why? Because there's an expression in the Torah, in Halakha, it says, Ein adam chayte v'loi loi. Nobody's going to commit a sin that doesn't have interest, that benefits you and not me. I'm not going to commit a sin for you. Selfishness, by definition, doesn't care about the other. So when two people come together, selfishness does not join in a real way. It may join temporarily because your enemy and my, we're friends because your enemy and my enemy are the same. But that's not true unity. True unity, you share something together. So two people come together, their selfishness does not become together. It may be a temporary plot, and you see it. Why did Rome fall? Why did so many empires fall? You'll always see it was arrogance and selfishness that ultimately destroyed. God forbid to even say this, but Hitler. Had Hitler not attacked Russia, and thank God he did, had he not overreached, had he not even tried to kill Jews, he probably could have conquered all of Europe and maybe the world. He overreached. He went too far. He started stepping on too many toes. He was able to get very far. So, and again, God forbid, I'm not saying this in any positive way. I'm just trying to point out something that is selfish is ultimately has to be self-destructive, because selfishness is about self. Look at every infection. It thrives in selfish environments when things are closed. Bring fresh air in, what happens to an infection? What happens when you shine a light and in a place where maggots and the crawling insects are thriving? Shine a light. Where do cobwebs? Where do all these negative forces fester? When there's neglect, when the things are closed up. You open something up, you shine a light, it's right away an immediate beginning of healing. Same thing psychologically. They talk about breaking the silence. As they say, the silence is worse than the rape. A crime is a crime. Abuse is abuse. But silence is far worse in a way, because it also doesn't allow us to talk about it. It becomes a self-contained secret, and you can't even heal. You can't even cry and say this was an injustice. And that psychologically has more damage than the original crime. Not technically, but emotionally and psychologically, because you're not even being validated. Something happened, you cry, you go into someone, I cry, something happened to me, I've been hurt. But if you can't even do that, what you're doing is creating that it becomes a complete selfish environment that doesn't leave anything breathing. Everything healthy has to breathe. And breathing is an openness, is the ability to give. To give is opening your arms. You close things, it's always a sign of the beginnings of death. Death is always about closure. Closing, locked in, trapped. So Korach, though his intention was correct, but the way he went about it was incorrect. And therefore, we learn from him, and that's why we told the story that yes, there's an approach where you can begin with good intentions, saying we're all equal, but when you lack the ingredient of bittul, when you lack the ingredient of that, you end up becoming a separator, not a uniter. So Korach ended up doing the opposite of what he wanted to do. He wanted to unite everybody. He ended up separating everybody, because he approached it not with appropriate bittul. Moses, on the other hand, was a leader, but he didn't lead because he was in power. He led out of humility, and his humility was an example of a force. And there's humility among different forces, diverse. Then you can have a joint effort that works. And you'll see most projects fall apart because people can't get along. That's what it comes down to. It's always a surprise to me. One of the surprises to me of every film I ever see are all the credits at the end. How many credits are there? Hundreds, right? Imagine thousands of people were able to get along and produce a film. But as we all know, that most of them end up with wars anyway. And I heard the biggest lawsuits in the country are all about plays and creative development of things, because everybody takes credit. I just read a story, a housewife, she's suing a playwright, a big playwright, because she says that part of his script was based on some conversation she had with him once in the corner or something. Go deny it. So the point is, selfishness is the key trap. And in our personal lives, it comes down to simply an attitude. I mentioned last week, Moda'ani is a perfect mission statement, beginning. Acknowledging that you have a soul, and that's the hub. And your soul now is going to gather sparks. It's going to gather the scattered letters and the scattered musical notes, and you want to bring it together to tell a story. Does your life tell a story? A story that you can be proud of? And the answer is absolutely, if you wanted to. But you have to do something about it. A story doesn't happen by itself. You have to write it. But you have all the components, because you have tomorrow there'll be a whole slew of new sparks, of new pieces, scattered pieces that God will provide you. Questions, are you going to take them and tell a story? At the end of the day, that when you make that list, it won't just be a list of 150 fragments. It'll be a list of, here's a day, and here's what I did, here's what I accomplished, and whatever I did, I was able to connect it to the higher calling that I have. Something that's more spiritual. And it's not as difficult as you may think. It requires getting out of our routines and our laziness, of just sticking to the status quo and our habits and patterns. And secondly, simply doing something that is positive. Connecting things. Everything that you do, ask yourself the next question, okay, how can I make this part of my so-called soul's mission on this earth? It doesn't mean don't do what you need to do. You go shopping, fine. You're going commuting, a business deal, just adding a dimension, not taking off. Adding a dimension that connects it it connects it. But that requires an element of selflessness, of not just focusing I got my needs met, let's move on. It's pausing and discovering. Like, you take a piece of food, we make a blessing on a piece of food. Every food. So food is necessary, we need to eat. If you make a blessing, you can say, I've done something to sanctify, to elevate, to appreciate. Take the energy I received from this meal. I did something kind. Every day you can show, here are the kind things I've did. These are the things that become connectors, and these are the things that live on. Because selfish things, as I said, all die. They die once you're finished with it. Once your needs are met, move on. This lives on even afterwards, because the kindness, or the sensitivity, or the positive force that came out of your effort, that lives on outside of you. It lives on whoever you've touched, or whatever you've touched. And it lives on in your story, in your narrative, that becomes the opposite of taking, it becomes the giving. That you're giving, and you ultimately have an inner satisfaction that you can really begin to identify. Here's the narrative, here's the story, the music that I am playing. So we all have this opportunity, and hopefully this week you can begin to implement it, everybody in their own particular way. I am sure that some of these ideas resonate, and maybe you're already doing parts of it, but sometimes putting it into context, articulating it a particular way, can help actually make it make sense, and also to give us each the strength to actually begin the process. So, see, I can say for myself, every Wednesday night, we sit here, we have a certain cohesiveness. One guy's talking, everyone else is listening. It's perfect. No arguments. And I leave before I get in the argument. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just trying to say is that I think that each of us can do the same. You all have your sphere of influence. It's about coming into an environment, and you're not coming there to take something. You're not coming to about me. It's about sharing. It's about uplifting. It's about inspiring. And that when people meet you, they should feel, they look forward to meet you, because every time they meet you, they hear an insight, they hear a positive thought, they hear strength, inspiration. That would be beautiful to be able to be people like that, right? That people will look forward to see you for that reason. Not look forward to see you for some external reason that doesn't last long, but because you actually give them something that is valuable, that's, as I said, empowering, strengthening, inspiring. So I wish that upon all of us here to do that, and you have it in your power. You have by your birthright, you have given the power to be unique, as they say. You were born an original. Don't become a copy. Thank you very much. Now let's make a few announcements. So Philip, our good friend Philip Namworth, is giving his class tomorrow evening, and we will continue next Wednesday night as usual. If you have not given us your email address, please do so we can stay in touch. I also send out a weekly email. And any way that we can help, that I can help, Volvo, our team, Meaningful Life Center, help create some cohesiveness, connection, in helping find this type of unity in your own life, please see us as a resource. That's what we're here to do, connect the dots. Thank you again, everyone. Have a very pleasant week.